And I use baseball terminology sometimes, or sports terminology in my teaching, in lots of ways, because baseball is baseball and books and nature. Besides music, give me baseball, books, and nature. And so sorry about the Dodgers this year, right?
Right. What happened there? So
I don't know.
Who knows, right? So, well, I'm right with you. So let's talk a little bit about education, Liz. So you're currently on faculty at Colburn, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the school and your faculty position there.
Okay. Let's see. So I taught at Dick Groves. Then the school closed for about 10 years. School closed. I was freelancing, doing some teaching on my own. I got a call from somebody at Colburn saying, we need a jazz piano teacher at Colburn. I think you would be great. I think you should apply. And I said, great, because I think at the time I was taking my son over there for like string orchestra or something, and the place was very impressive. Beautiful facility, great, really great, except you have to drive downtown, so that commute is bad. Right. But I thought, wow, I really miss being a part of a community in terms of faculty. Like at the Dick Grove School, it was a community. It remains a community to this day. Anybody that went there or taught there, there's a Facebook alum page, and it's just everybody that ever had anything to do with the Dick Grove School feels like they were lucky and had something special. So I missed that, and I wanted to be a part of a community. So I thought, yeah. So I said to him, do you need a degree? And he said, yes, we required a degree. And I said, well, I don't have a degree. That stinks, I don't have a degree. And he said, I'm so sorry, you would be great, but yeah, you need a degree. So I was really, really soul searched about that. And I thought, wow, I would be good. And what am I going to do about this? And I really thought about it, and I had dinner with a friend, and she just looked at me and she said, you have to go back and get a degree. You don't want to ever have to lose a job you deserve to have or you want because you don't have a piece of paper. You got to do it. I was like, God, my kids were like, maybe they were 8 and 9 or 7 and 8.
Yeah,
they were something. And I was working and I was doing this and this and running. And how am I going to? But I thought, you just got to make it happen. So I had very few credits, but the local Santa Monica College and West LA College, I took classes. I was in class with people half my age. I just went, and I got to get these lower division classes. I had to take math, college algebra. I had to take all kinds of stuff. And I did it. Then I was like, okay, now I have to transfer somewhere. I had a long road, So I started thinking, well, I'm working, and I'm not willing to give up the work, and I'm not willing to give up time being a good parent to my kids. So I got I looked up online programs. So there was an online program at Cal State Dominguez Hills, which is not too far from me. I also couldn't afford the time to go drive somewhere and park and do it. All I just couldn't do it. So they had 2 online programs at the time. I don't know what one of them was like out of the question. The other one was called Applied Studies. Applied Studies. Boy, that's specific, right?
I'm in.
It's a Bachelor of Science, but it's online. It's a degree. Turns out it was kind of like a liberal arts degree, but in Bachelor of Science. So the classes were slightly different than a Bachelor of Arts. And it was 2 years worth. And I said, okay, I'll do that. I need a degree. So I'll do that. So it took 6 semesters, and I would get home late at night. I'd be reading. I'd be answering stuff online. I would be participating in the group discussions online. I would watch the lectures, and if I could, I'd speed them up so that I didn't, I was a little impatient. Yeah. And I took all those classes, and most of them were pretty good. There were a couple that I'd like to have that time back, but I got that degree, Applied Studies, right? Wow.
Yeah.
What is that?
Right. You got it.
I Bachelor of Science and Communications minor. So coincidentally, about 6 months after I finished that, I got a call from the same person at Colburn that said, we have that opening again. and I think you'd be great. And I said, that's great because I got a degree. And he said, oh, we no longer require it. I kid you not.
I knew that. I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming. That's hilarious.
But you know what? I feel this about education. I don't regret. Well, maybe just a couple of minutes, 2 of those classes, but generally speaking, I don't regret any education I've ever had, and nobody can ever take it away from you. So
that's
I went in, I applied, I got called in for an interview along with a few other people who are frankly stronger. They're fantastic pianists in LA. And then I got called back for the second, which is they watch you teach. They put you in a room, they observe you teaching something. Right. So there were probably 3 of us that got down to that thing. And so they put me in a room with a 16-year-old I had never met, and they're sitting in the corner. And I know that my strength is with people. So I was very lucky because this 16-year-old guy was very talented and didn't really have a lot of technical experience, but he was very musical, and we just clicked. We just clicked, and he played a little bit, and right away I had a couple things that I could tell him that made all the difference. I mean, if they had given me someone else, maybe it wouldn't have been the case, but with him, it was. And after about 20 minutes, they said, "Oh, we think we've seen enough," and they left. And I stayed in there with the guy for another, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. It was just such a simple,
Right.
So I got hired, and now I'm very proud to say that guy who helped me get the gig, unbeknownst to him, he became my student, and then he went on to Cal State Northridge to major in jazz studies or jazz piano. I went to his senior recital. He is one of the few, there aren't many that major that end up doing it. This guy, and I'm going to give him a plug here, his name is Michael Raganese. He is a absolutely spectacular musician, pianist, writer, has his own career going. He's, struggling along, as we all do, but he is a very, very fine musician, and now he's doing some teaching in LA, and I love the fact that that's how I got the gig, and that's where he went. And so that's how I got involved there. I started teaching privately, just a few students. And then a few years in, I was asked to start the adult studies jazz program, because they had the adults in with the teenagers for combos and such. And it was, they wanted to have a jazz, the adults to have their own thing. And so Lee Seacard, who was the director of the jazz group, said, well, I would like for you to direct these adult group. And I thought, whoa, I've never done that. I've never done that. I mean, I've led my own groups professionally. I've played in plenty of professional groups, but I had never directed an amateur, adult students. Right. So he said, I know you're going to do great. And I said, okay, do you have any words of wisdom? Because he had been doing this for a long time with the teenagers. And he said, 2. I have 2 words, 2 points. And I said, let me have it. And really, they were very, very good points. One is, he said, I highly encourage you to stay with the philosophy that I have and that others have, which is ditch the fake books. It's all about your ears. They gotta not use fake books. Right. So I thought, well, that's a little bit scary, but yeah, okay. And then I said, what's the other? He said, the other is you have to learn it's not a democracy. If you're the leader, you're the leader. And I thought, yeah, but I like everybody to feel good and everybody to have a part of it. And I really, everybody should. Well, that's true. But I became very aware that what they're looking for and need, of course, respect and let them have input and all of that. Right. Yes. But they need a strong leader who knows more than they do, that can help them. I don't know everything, but I know more than they do. So I started to work that way and teach them things by ear and teach them melodies by ear. And it's now been, I think it's been 10 years, 3 semesters a year, fall, spring, and we meet on fall, spring, summer. We meet on Sundays for 2 hours. Some of the people one of them has been there since day one. So he has
Wow.
He has signed up, and a couple of guys have been there for 8 years, 9 years. And so I have my youngest I have two groups, two full groups. The youngest is 25 and the oldest is 86. And
Wow.
all of these people
Wow.
from all walks of life, and I mean, they're all very smart, passionate people smart people who are passionate about jazz that come together and they want to get better and they want to have a safe place. So we do a concert every semester, and I do welcome input from everybody, but at some point they want my I need to be a leader, and I don't want to prolong this, but I just have to put this in there. I was thinking about this during the pandemic.
Yes.
Which was anybody who was teaching at the time. I still look back and I just say, wow, I'm so glad I woke up from that whatever. It was such a sudden thing that,
oh my God,
that I had always avoided teaching over the internet or over Skype or anything like that. I just avoided. I always said, no, thank you, I'm sorry, it's not my thing. And then it came to, well, it has to be your thing or you are unemployed. So I figured it out, and I got the good mic, and I got the overhead camera, and I did all that stuff. But like, what am I going to do with these ensemble groups? The whole reason they sign up, the whole reason they sign up is to play together. How am I going to do this? And I had some very technical people who said, well, look, there's this software out there, and you can do this. And I thought, well, this guy is technically very advanced, and a couple people are, but most of them don't even. They can barely even, a USB mic. What's a USB mic? And the timing and the delay and the sound and no. So I had to figure out a way to facilitate that, and I'm so proud of all of them and of myself for having found ways to do that, so that they all became stronger musicians and found ways to do it.
You know what that did, Liz? When you have to articulate your convictions, not just show your convictions by sitting down and playing. When you have to actually articulate your convictions, which we were forced to do when you go to a Zoom lesson or online. Now your words become really, really important. Really important, right? It actually makes you a better teacher when you don't have that to rely on, and you have to articulate it and explain it in such a way that the other person goes, got it.
I did have the piano there. I mean, I had my setup with the piano, but absolutely. And teaching jazz theory, I taught some jazz theory classes on that, and I really had to get my materials together in a very, my gosh. My family at the time, my son was living here too, and they were just like, you never stop working. You're always either teaching or preparing or doing follow-up. I said, I know, but I don't know any other way to do it right now.
Right.
And with the groups, the drummers dropped out, but other than that, everybody else stuck around, and we found a way to find value. What I found was that in the projects that we did, and we did many, and they all say that they became stronger musicians, and I know they did. And one of the reasons is they were forced to listen more, to listen to music and to listen to themselves, because they all had to record themselves with backing track, with some guidelines and this and that. And then we listened together to each person's, thing that they did that week. And I did a lot of research so that I could bring them really interesting content that was they may not have thought of, and so I learned a tremendous amount myself. I learned it in a literal way rather than just sort of abstract. I know this is there, but I was forced, as you say, your words are yes,
so important, so important.
Yeah, and so that's the silver lining to that experience.
Yes, that is indeed. So, okay, so let's talk about the student a little bit. In your teaching experience, what have you come to kind of realize the biggest challenges, the biggest struggles that somebody, when they go, they get bit by the jazz bug, they want to start learning how to play jazz, like say jazz piano. What have you found over the years in teaching are some of the biggest hurdles, some of the biggest hurdles that students have to deal with when they finally go full speed ahead and they're going to learn how to play jazz piano?
Well, that's a a great question. It's a big question.
It is.
One of the things that I learned, it didn't take me long to learn this, but there are no two people that are alike. There are no
Right.
two students that are alike.
That's right. That's right.
I have and continue to try to find new ways, always, to look at the same thing through a different window, depending on who the
Right.
person is.
Right.
One person is going to respond to these words and this demonstration. Somebody else just doesn't get it. You have a
Right.
group, I mean, in a group setting, that's one thing. In a private setting, also. I mean, you have people who are very rhythmic, naturally
Right.
rhythmic. They get
Right.
it. They just get it. But have trouble maybe hearing pitches or identifying harmony or whatever. But they got it with regard to the rhythm. Those are the easy ones. And then there are some that are, I mean, they have perfect pitch. They play great classical piano. They have more chops than I ever will. And it's hard for them to, it's a fine line whether something swings or doesn't.
Right. Right.
If they've had a classical, lots of
Right.
my students have had a classical background. I did not. They've had technique. I did not. I mean, didn't have training. I had a very, very unconventional background. And I had certain things that came natural to me that I was very, very lucky about, and other things that I still struggle with. But
Right.
I think that, so the first thing is to just sort of assess, make sure they want to learn. I've had only a few over the years, who they really weren't very interested, but maybe their parents were interested in them becoming a musician or jazz musician. And there have only been a couple of times in many, many years where I've said, this isn't working, because I mean, I've pulled every rabbit out of every hat, trying to inspire, trying to motivate. And it's just, they just don't want to be here. They don't want to do it.
Yep.
They're not ready for it. And I have to say, that's happened 3 times in 20 years. And one of those, I got a call back from that kid. Well, he was a boy at the time. He was young. He was about 12. And I don't, usually now I start maybe somebody around 12, 13. But he called me when he was about 20. And he said, I want to tell you, I feel like I wasted, like, I'm so sorry I didn't listen, like I wasn't ready at the time.
Right.
I thought about it so many times. I said, you just made my year. Just
Yeah,
hearing
right.
you say that, because I kind of felt like a failure. Like,
Right. Right.
So I guess because a lot of my students come to me after having a classical training,
Okay.
they want to learn to play jazz. So I say, well, who do you listen to? Well, sometimes they don't really have a very clear answer, or they say something that I don't feel is particularly jazz, like new agey stuff.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And so then I say, well, so what makes you think you want to learn to play jazz? What do you think jazz is? And so I hear what they have to say, and then sometimes I will play a couple of different kinds of jazz. I'll say, well, you could have jazz, something bluesy like this. I'll play a blues in a couple of different styles, or you could play this. I'll do like a bebop kind of a thing. I said, or this, maybe a Bill Evans kind of a thing. So jazz, but the essence of jazz really is improvisation. And many of those classical players are afraid to play, quote, wrong notes.
Oh, yes.
So I always say, what is the worst that's going to happen? Is lightning going to strike you dead if you play a note that doesn't sound good? And of course, there's the Miles thing. There are no wrong notes, and you just it depends on what you do afterward. And I know, and that's true. And he could pull it off no matter what. And most experienced jazz musicians can absolutely pull that off.
Right.
And I'm full of examples of that.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I can, like, this guy did this, and I did that.
Right.
And,
Right.
yeah. Even yesterday in a lesson, and I was working on a monk tune, and it was an F7 chord, but the downbeat of beat 1 was an E. So, like, how do you, well, I said, well, listen to it. It sounds great. So I guess it's not wrong. Right. Or you play the note, but you don't play it at the same time as the other. You displace the things. So, so to get them away from the fear of sounding bad. And the other thing is I have to get through their heads is that jazz is not something you learn in 6 months or a year or 5 years or 10 years. It's a
It's a
lifetime.
lifelong pursuit. Yeah, right.
For sure. So I
Yeah.
have to keep their expectations realistic and just work with them and try to get them to understand what syncopation is, jazz language,
Yeah.
just phrasing and articulation.
Yeah.
I think that really feel, phrasing, articulation, those are the three things
Yeah.
that I think that I have to, like educate somebody about first.
Yeah, well, you bring up so many good points. Oftentimes when students come and I meet with them, their first lesson, I always say, "So you want to study music?" And they go, "Yes." And I go, "So then tell me, what is music the study of?" And they kind of look at me like a deer in headlights. I said, "Well, if you want to study something, I think you probably already have a pretty good idea what it's the study of, because if you didn't know what it's the study of, why would you want to study it?"
Good point.
Good point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so of course, I know they're not going to be able to give me an answer, because right. You have to have some experience to be able to answer that question. And I go, "Well, let me tell you what it's not the study of. Let's start with that. Jazz is not the study of dots and buttons. You're looking at a piece of paper and you see that dot means push that button, and then that dot means push that button. I say jazz really at its core essence is the study of shapes and sounds. Shapes and sounds. So we have to study shapes and sounds in order to get to jazz. And, which touches upon what I wanted to talk about a little bit, the misconceptions that students have, right, which are really big hurdles, like the ear side of things, right? So oftentimes a student will say, "I think I'm tone deaf," and I go, I said, "Life must be excruciatingly painful for you," and they like, "Well, how so?" I said, "Because if you're tone deaf, you can't tell the difference between, say, a helicopter and a police car siren. You can't tell the difference between a dog barking and a cat meowing." And they go, "Well, no, I can. I of course I can. I know the difference between those sounds." I said, "Well, then if you know the difference between those sounds, you can certainly learn the difference between a major sound and a minor sound, and a dominant sound and a half diminished sound. It's not that you're tone deaf. Nobody's ever taught you what the sounds of music are and what they sound like, so that you can register those." So, that's just an example of the misconceptions that when people come to study in jazz, that we as teachers have to, as educators, kind of have to strip that away from them in order for them to get to the starting line to really start having progress. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a great point, and that goes along with the word that I use, which I think I used the word. Maybe I just thought the word, but the word fear. Their fear of right. Not being good or not sounding good, and but the misconception, that's a great point, and one I'm going to remember. Learning the jazz language. When you say you haven't. Maybe you can hear the difference between these two sounds, but major and minor, they haven't learned the vocabulary. They haven't learned the sound to identify the sound. And it's correct. Funny because you think about somebody with perfect pitch, one might say, "Well, then why couldn't you teach yourself perfect pitch?" And I know there have been courses and this and that, and I kind of briefly tried to do that. I thought it'd be a good thing. And I wasn't that successful with it, and decided to just forget about it. But I mean, it doesn't really matter. But I've had many students that do have perfect pitch, and that is a gift. Sometimes a curse, but absolutely. I think that misconceptions. Yes, one of the misconceptions is like how easy it is, and if it was easy, everyone would do it, and everyone would be able to do it well. But I've changed my terminology over the years. I'm going to say even more in the last 5 or 6 years. I think that, the longer I teach, the better I get. I hope so, because I'm always looking for new ways to say things and new ways to think of things and new understandings to have that I can pass along. And at some points, like this has happened in the last, I'm going to say 6 months. This is true confessions here. I've I have thoughts about, I have bins of great books, like great books by the greats, some of whom you've had on your shows. Dan Hurley and Bert Ligon,
yes.
my God.
Right,
My poor students, my high school students, sometimes when they graduate, for their graduation, little gift I give them Bert Ligon's book, Comprehensive Technique for the
What a great, what a great gift.
You know, and so I'm in doing that, it enables me to communicate with new students and students that I've had for a long time about, you know, I sort of get a little bit metaphoric, talk about like pools of, not spools, pools of sound, like a pool of sound. You don't want to think about, I learned improv from a scale standpoint, like you have this chord and this is the scale that works. You have this chord, this is the scale that works, right? And that worked for me. It works for me to this day. But the mistake, misconception is if you learn your scales and you learn what scales go with what chords, then you're going to play those scales. So I always make it a very strong point as when you're improvising, you don't play scales.
Right.
The scales are not for that. The scales are the notes that are compatible with that chord. But
that's correct.
It may not be in that particular context,
but,
or you can go away from it. So I think of a scale as a pool of sound, this particular sound and personality, and then you can do all this other stuff, chromatic, and God, you better do a bunch of other stuff, you know? So to keep it interesting.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, I had a teacher one time to kind of magnify or illuminate what you're saying here. I had a teacher one time say, "Hey, Bob, let me. How do you teach students to play wrong notes right?" Right. And I said, "Oh, well, that's easy. That's easy." And he said, "Well, how so? What's the answer?" I said, "Well," I said, "to teach students to play wrong notes right. How about this? Teach them to play the right notes right first. then we can worry about the wrong notes." Right. And what you're talking about with the chord scale relationships are about learning the right notes so that the wrong notes are illuminated so that you can utilize them correctly in conjunction with the right notes. But if you don't know the right notes, you can't identify the wrong notes. I mean, right?
Yeah, I every once in a while I'll get a student who is a little resistant to, you know, again, it's like, why are you here if you're not really looking for information and many other things, inspiration and all that stuff. But and I have had students, and I have one right now who I feel like my job is basically just to stay out of his way because there's so much going on, and he is not interested in learning some of the things that I'm best at teaching. But there is something going on in there. He's not ready to hear it. That's what it is.
Right.
I've learned that. Sometimes people are just not ready, no matter how important it is and how important it is. I know that they learn this certain thing, and no matter how impatient I am for them to learn it, they may not be ready to hear it at that point.
Correct.
And I think that is some wisdom that I've come to in I'm going to say even the last 5 years. So I think that this particular student of mine right now, is growing in ways that he needs to grow right now.
Right.
And they're wonderful ways, really. Right. That he'll get to the other stuff.
Yeah.
But right now, I can't stand in his way of what he's ready to learn right now.
Yeah, you know, that's, you know, and here's another misconception I think a lot of times with students. It's hard for students to hear this. But I think we all fall into this camp, Liz. I mean, in our own development, we all fall into this camp, right? You know, I'll before I tell you what I'm going to say, I'll back up a second. I remember when I was finishing my doctorate degree at North Texas, and I was doing my dissertation, and my major professor, Dr. Froelich, you know, German, didn't mince words. She was tough cookie, and she would X out. I would take in some of my best writing, and she'd go exit out, right? And I finally said, I finally had enough. And I said to her, stop. I'm not rewriting that. I'm not doing it over again. It's done. And she looked up at me and she said, "Oh, my dear Bob. She said, "Stop falling in love with your words." I said, "Whoa." Whoa. Now let me bring it back to jazz education and jazz pianist. So oftentimes, students, me included, think we're better than what we are. So stop falling in love with what we think is so good and be comfortable enough with stepping back, with going back in order to be catapulted forward. Right? I tell students all the time, we have to go. You can't, unless we pull back, you can't get launched forward. I'll give you a good example. I have a student where I'm saying, look, I want you to play these changes in time with your left hand, like a Freddie Green chink, 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 chink. I want you to go chink, 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 chink. And then I want you to, in your right hand, I want you to just keep it simple, improvise or play this melody over the top of this time going on in your left hand. Well, they can't do it. They get all mad. They get all frustrated. And then they try to tell you that they can do all this other stuff, but they can't, for some reason, they can't do that. And I'm going like, sooner or later, you have to just embrace, you know what? Maybe I better go back to just some of this fundamental stuff.
Yes.
And work on these fundamental skills of being able to illuminate time in my left hand and be able to play against that time in my right hand. Maybe that's a big time skill that I actually should learn. He's not taking, it's important, right? And so I think it's a challenge for students to always go, you know what? It's okay for me to go back.
Yes.
Which is really going to actually catapult them forward. What are your thoughts?
Right. Yeah, the foundation. Well, it reminds me, almost everything that you're saying is reminding me of something that happened in the recent, very, very recent past. As recent as in the last 24 hours, I kid you not. Really, I was working the monk tune thing. That happened, just yesterday. And also yesterday, I have a student, an adult student, who, let's see here, is working on the tune Fever. This is an adult who's very musical. Okay. Just is doing this, enjoys music and super musical, doesn't have a lot of time to work. Anyway, the bass line, dum, 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 dum. So she's doing that, and we were having the lesson over Zoom, it doesn't matter why, but we were having the lesson over Zoom. So she's getting that, and I said, just make sure that you get those anticipated notes. And so then she had it. She didn't have a metronome going or anything like that, but I could hear it. Seemed like she had it. I said, okay, so your reward for doing that is now you get to snap your right hand on 2 and 4 and do that bass line. So she goes, doom, 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 doom. I said, doom, 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 doom. See, the last one comes the same. And that's just that's a 4-bar phrase. So in doing that little exercise, left hand, just a little lick, and the right hand snapping on 2 and 4. And I realized, oh, okay. I wrote that down. I'm going to have everyone do that. That's just such a little thing that is not simple. It's a little thing.
It's a little thing that's a huge thing.
Huge thing. Oh, you think you've got it? And she's great. Yeah. She's very, very humble and all of that. But when I asked her to do that, I realized, I have to remember to ask everybody to do that, because that also tells you where people are at,
Yeah. Along those same lines, stressing to students how important conceptual understanding is, right? I always tell students, if it's cloudy upstairs, it's going to be cloudy downstairs. Come on, man. If it's a mess up here, it's a mess here. So you're right. And
very true.
Very right. And so I used to have a teacher that used to greet me at the door. Liz, I'm not kidding you. He'd greet me at the door and he'd go like this: B flat dominant 7, and I'd go B flat. B flat. He goes, you don't know it. A half diminished. A, you don't know it. C sharp minor 7. I go C sharp. You don't know it. And I finally said, okay, will you give me a second here? Will you please just give me a second? And he goes like this. He goes, spell Bob. And I went, okay, I see where he's going. So I went like this. I went B. Right. So he laughed.
Spell it backwards.
Yeah, right. That's what I should have done, right? But his whole deal was, his whole deal was if you didn't know C sharp minor 7 is C sharp E G sharp B. What are you looking for? What
I know
on the, right?
it's hard though. I feel that there's so much that we take for granted at this point, and you got to. I feel like you have to make it fun in some way. You have to give them some candy. Correct. Even though for me, back in the day, I was happy as a clam learning what every single note was. It just, I have like a little bit of OCD in me. And it's like, no, I'm not just going to learn one chord. I'm going to learn every one. And there was some sort of enjoyment I found in being able to go C sharp, E, G sharp, B, whatever it was. I love that.
Right.
But most people, they can't like do everything in 12 keys before you give them a song,
Absolutely.
You got to give them some to have some fun.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely. And the reality is, right, eventually we want them, when they think C sharp minor 7, we want them to do what? Grab the shape. Right. We don't want to, you're not grabbing the notes, you're grabbing the shape. Right. Just like a piano teacher teaches a child, every good boy does fine. Not that they hang on to it, that they get rid of it. They get rid of it as quickly as possible. So, these are all crutches. These are all bridges to help us get to the shapes and sounds that we can play.
Shapes and sounds. I like that. Yeah.
Right.
Shape sounds, and I'm going to add one to that. Shapes, sounds, and feelings. Shape, sound, and feeling. Because I think jazz, freedom of expression. Yeah. Freedom.
Right. Well, and it goes back to what you just mentioned earlier. Who are you listening to? Right. Well, that's right. That's why that question is so important, because that's going to lead you to those feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And now, even though I am the jazz piano instructor at Colburn, really what I am is the everything except classical teacher. Because and I have people sometimes, they want to come and they want to learn how to play, sing a Beatles song and play with, accompanying themselves, singing and playing a Beatles song.
Yeah. Right.
I am happy to help them sing and play a Beatles song. Beatles are great. Yeah. It's music. It's great music.
Absolutely.
If that's what turns them on, they should do it. That's what turned me on. That's what made me a lot of money playing gigs, right? Yep. So that's a very it's certainly valid and wonderful, and it's music, and it's what makes them happy.
Well, I'm a big-time jazzer, but people will ask me oftentimes who are some of my favorite musicians, and their jaws drop, because I'll say something like, well, I love Willie Nelson's, I love George Strait, and they're like, like, are you? I go, what are you talking? I like more people than just jazz guys,
Right. I have a student, I feel like I'm always saying that. One of my sons says, Mom, you start so many sentences. I have this student but it's true. I mean, I really connect with every one of them.
Right.
And I honestly, this has to do with, I think, something we said earlier, but by far the best thing about what I do is the people I meet. And I get to have a window into their life for an hour and share music and just life. And being more than a music teacher is trying to understand what they're ready to hear and how to help them get better, whatever the style is. And not to bounce around too much, but when people ask me, who are you, what's your favorite music? It's like, well, Queen, Freddie Mercury, Carole King.
There you go. There you go.
Sheesh, there's so much great music. Earth, Wind and Fire. I just,
power.
Jazz is just one. And I wouldn't want anyone to be just completely narrow in that way. I was for a long time, and then I got categorized in that area until I started learning Afro-Cuban and Brazilian music. And then for a while, people are like, "Oh, she only plays Latin music." It's like, what are you talking about? I played, and in LA anyway, that became an issue. I don't know about anywhere else, but they like to compartmentalize, and now maybe it's a little bit different, but it's kind of frustrating because yes, you can be good at more than one thing.
Exactly right. So, you touched upon another thing that I want to illuminate, and we'll kind of use it as a way to wrap things up here. Is, I mentioned to you earlier before we actually started recording that I had a teacher that he asked me one day in a lesson. He said, "Bob, what's the greatest thing about music?" And of course, I was like 14, Liz, so I thought it was a trick question. You know what I mean? I thought, when you're 14, everything's a trick question, right? So I said, the greatest thing, and I thought about it, and I said, polychords. And he goes, polychord? No. I said, altered dominant chords. No.
At 14, you were using those terms?
Yeah, well, because of him, because he was a good teacher. Yeah, and so he said, no, Bob, it's none of that. He said, don't ever forget that the greatest thing about music is the people that you're going to meet through it. And I can tell you that, amen, right? I think of him often, every day, because every day I'm just meeting fabulous people, and today's certainly no exception. Liz, it's been such a great blessing to meet you, and I'm so thankful and so grateful that you sent me that email to point out my mistake.
Who knew?
Yeah, right. And I just hope and pray that you continue to send me emails to point out my mistakes so I can get them fixed and corrected. But
that's going to be necessary.
But no, I hope so. I'm so grateful, though. It's so great to get to know you and meet you and,
likewise,
and establish our friendship. It's awesome.
Likewise, I'm very grateful as well, and feel very flattered to be in the company of others who have done your show, who are really some of my heroes, honestly.
Right? Likewise. Mm-hmm. Right.
Oh, absolutely.
Likewise.
So
all right. So, well, I know it's going to be a treat for all the Jazz Piano Skills listeners to get to know you, and they'll be able to check you out. I know that all you got to do is do a search for Liz. Just do a search for her, just like I did, stalk her a little bit. You're going to find out all kinds of great stuff. And
I'm not too sure I like the word stalking, but a search is okay.
Well, I mean, stalking in the most kind, gentlest, and professional way possible.
Why, thank you.
Right. So, Liz, on behalf of all the Jazz Piano Skills listeners, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining me. And you know what? I'm going to get you on. I'm going to get you recorded right now and committed to coming back on in the future.
Love it.
And coming back on again as a guest. I'd love to have you back again because there's so much. We've just scraped the tip of the iceberg here.
I agree. Oh, I didn't say that. Oh, I should have said. So
well, go ahead, say it. Yeah. Well,
what are you doing tomorrow?
Hey, don't tempt me like that. Don't do it, Liz. So anyway, oh great. It's been wonderful, Liz. Thank you so much, and I look forward to our continued friendship, and I look forward to having you back on Jazz Piano Skills.
As do I. Thank you, Bob.